morning. Please be seated. Thank you all, and thank you to your rector for inviting me to give a sermon today. It's always a pleasure to be here at St. Mark's. It's such a joy to see you all here today. And honestly, I feel fortunate this morning. Many parables require a lot of context about the world of Judea and Rome in Jesus' time before you can really get at the emotional resonance of a story. But your rector was kind enough to give me a parable with an emotional center I think all of us can understand. As a millennial myself, I would freely describe the story as a relatable feel. The fact is, we have all been there at some point or another. We work hard, and someone else does not. But yet, somehow or another, they get the same reward as we do. They don't get what we think that they deserve. It hurts. We don't get what we think that we deserve, which is more than them, of course. And it hurts. All we want to do is to find some landowner that we can grumble to. In my day job, I'm a professor. And Lord knows, I have plenty of stories of students who have felt like they did not get what they deserved and grumbled against me, like we read in the story. But the fact is, I myself am not immune to these feelings. I think about myself when I was 17 years old. I had applied to many universities to go to for undergrad. One of them that I applied to offered me a scholarship based in part on need and in part on merit. Great, thought I. I worked hard for this. I did my part, and in the end, I got what I deserved. Then I got a phone call. Because of updated financial documents my family had submitted from the previous year, they were taking my scholarship away from me. I was angry. After all, the main change in my family's financial situation had resulted from the death of my grandpa, my dad's dad, who left some money to my dad. How was it fair that the university was taking away money from me because my grandpa died? Other children with live grandparents presumably got the scholarship. I, now with 3 dead grandparents, had it taken away. What did I do to deserve this? I don't remember exactly how I reacted to the person on the phone. I'm sure I felt like I should grumble. But instead, I could imagine myself being a good Minnesotan, saying something bland like, "Oh golly," and hanging up as quickly as I could. We'll come back to that story later on. First, though, let's give some more context to today's gospel reading. This parable comes to us at an interesting time in Jesus' ministry. Jesus is about to turn towards Jerusalem to end his teaching. He is about to experience something that he knows he doesn't deserve. But rather than complaining or even giving us a nice hearty oofta, Jesus is doing something quite different. Jesus is having a bit of a moment. He has just told his disciples that abandoning your family is something that will be rewarded. So much for family values. On top of that, he has told his followers that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter heaven. This is profoundly countercultural. It was then, and it is now, even today. That is especially true because it flips on its head the idea of what it means to deserve something. Haven't the rich worked hard to get there? Don't they deserve what they get? No, is the clear answer that Jesus gives us. Instead, Jesus says pretty much the opposite. Just like with today's reading, he ends the last parable with, "The last will be first and the first last." He echoes that again today, which means it's something we want to pay attention to. In today's parable, we see a strange story. Instead of telling us to sit comfortably with our feelings, the ones that tell us that we should get what we deserve, Jesus flips that on its head. A landowner tries to hire workers for his vineyard 5 times all throughout the day. Each time, he promises to give them whatever is right as a reward. At the end of the day, starting with the folks who join the landowner last, everyone is given the same wage, 1 denarius, 1 day's wages. Grumbling inevitably ensues. Relatably, the men who labored all day feel like they deserve more than those who did not. But Jesus suggests that that idea is a dangerous one. The landowner chides the early comers, asking, "Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me?" Repeating the end of the immediately preceding chapter, Jesus asserts once more, "The last will be first, and the first will be last." Let's go back to my anecdote from earlier. I felt like I should have received the scholarship that I won before it was taken away. But did I deserve it? My dad's parents moved with him and his older brother in the 1950s to one of a stretch of suburbs of Detroit known as the Points. All of them have Grosse Pointe in their name, hence the collective name of the Points. If you're familiar with the 1997 film Grosse Pointe Blank, it was set at my dad's high school, to give you some context. From the mid-1940s until about 1960, when it was revealed, and even then they tried to stretch it a little longer, buying a house in the Points was subject to what was called a point system. And you can imagine a capital P on point. Here's how the system worked. Without their knowledge, people who were seeking to buy a house in the Points were tailed by a private detective. The private detective would fill out a form and send it to real estate agents in the Points to determine whether the family looking to buy a house deserved to be able to own a home in the Points. The form would indicate questions like, are the husband's immediate associates typical? And does the family have a swarthy, slightly swarthy, or not at all swarthy appearance? Different answers were given different numbers of points. If you were WASPs like my family, you only needed 50 points to be allowed to buy the house. If you were Italian, you needed 75 points. If you were Jewish, you needed 85 points, and there was a supplementary questionnaire just for you as well. If you were Black or Asian, you were never acceptable. There was no amount of points that you could earn that would mean that you deserved a house in the Points. Now, I should note this was not a formal and legal requirement by law, but rather an enforced aspect of the business of buying and selling houses. If a realtor sold to a buyer who did not earn enough points, that is, a buyer who did not deserve to live in the Points, according to the Realtors Association, they were no longer eligible to do business with other Grosse Pointe realtors. But the market was lucrative, and so agents in the Points gladly submitted to this system. The realtors of the Points made it clear who they thought deserved to be in their community, and they succeeded. The towns of the Points were deeply segregated for years. Even after the point system ended, redlining and exclusionary norms kept the town uniformly white. Most of the black people who lived in the points until the 1980s were live-in domestic servants. The first black family to move into Grosse Pointe proper in 1966 had to have white friends purchase a house and then sell it directly to the family. This occurred even as Detroit itself, which is literally on the border of the points, became predominantly black. This accomplished the purpose of the point system, keeping property values high by keeping certain people out. The points have always had some of the highest property values in the area. When my grandpa died, his main asset was his home, the sale of which was split between my dad and my uncle. My family directly profited from the point system and its consequences. Now, I know how hard I worked in high school. I know what my grades were. I know what my standardized test scores were. By the standards of the community that I was raised in, I was a good kid with a bright future. But what I didn't reckon with at the time was the privilege that got me the breathing room to allow me to immerse myself entirely into my studies. Maybe I didn't deserve to have the money taken away from me just because my grandpa died, but I also did nothing to deserve my good fortune for happening to have been born into a family that encouraged me to go to college and was able to give me the support that I needed to do so. The parable we hear in today's gospel reading does not give us very much context for the laborers working in the vineyard, besides a timetable. Some show up at 9 o'clock, others are idling still at 5 o'clock. But we don't know anything about the rest of the days of each group of workers. We don't know why some can make it out at 9 and others at 5. We don't know what those 5 o'clock workers have done already with their day. Our society teaches us that for much of what we do, one person may deserve something more than another person. In the points, this was expressed most heinously as the point system. What today's gospel reading makes clear is that such a notion has no place in God's kingdom. The landowner, after all, is a bad capitalist. But that seems to be exactly the message. In this parable, Jesus argues against trying to understand the love of God in corporate terms. Instead, we see a different paradigm. God's love, God's mercy, God's charity, God's grace, all are given to all equally. We all get bread from heaven. The last will be first, and the first last. Jesus said that everyone deserves the profits of the kingdom. Now, it is unlikely, based on what I know of your rector and what I have encountered when being in the walls of the sanctuary, that any of you were taking approving notes about the point system when I was describing it earlier. I doubt that any of you will start instituting Penn Yan's first point system for intended home buyers. You know which side you would be on in Grosse Pointe. But I think all of us could reconsider our relationship with the idea of what it means to deserve something. Regardless of what methods you use in your work or school, God says that in God's kingdom, the rules are different. We all need to consider the idea that everyone in the parable that we read for today, even the early arrivals, were given exactly what they deserved. The same reward, God's love, the same bread from heaven, given to everyone, the same as everyone else. When we reflect on the things that allowed us to wake up early and make it to the marketplace with enough time to be idle, at 9 in the morning or even earlier, we might reassess our relationship with the idea of deserving more than the others around us. Once we do that, we may find ourselves choosing to go last, choosing, so that we can watch those who went last go first. And we can watch them with joy to receive exactly what they and we deserve. Amen.